I slid the lock closed on my front door and turned to face the living room. Suddenly, the sob that I'd been working so hard to contain erupted from deep in my throat. I could feel tears stinging behind my contacts, moistening my mascara and making muddy rivers down my cheeks. I was having a bad day. Many emotions were flitting through my mind. I was feeling fear. I was feeling sadness. I was feeling confusion. At 23, I had experienced a wide variety of things, and I was starting to think of myself as an adult. But I had one single thought at that moment. I wanted my mommy. My morning had started off about 2 hours earlier, much as many mornings had started before. I slept through my alarm, hurriedly rushed through my shower and getting ready, and as I ran out to the Jeep, I could feel and hear the sound of my damp hair freezing in the chilly November morning. I started the engine and noticed, with a sense of pride, well over 100,000 miles on the first vehicle I'd ever owned, bought new, each payment made from a series of part-time jobs in high school and college. Good times were had in that Jeep. I'd gone to the beach, I'd gone to the mountains, and I'd gone many places in between. As I drove to work, I was very conscious of the fact that I'd be late again. I'd probably get written up again. And I vaguely wondered if this could possibly be the last time before I got fired. I don't know why I was worried about that, because as I pulled into the parking lot, something more consuming took my attention. I noticed, as I put the Jeep in the parking situation, that a thin, liquid-looking line of flame was dripping from under the dash and singeing the carpet on the passenger seat beside me. Thinking quickly, I ran into my office and grabbed a coffee pot full of water, hoping to extinguish the flame. But when I got back outside, it was already too late. Between the smoke, the fire, and the deafening roar, the Jeep was gone in a matter of minutes, taking with it my keys, my wallet, and my dignity. Not long after the fire department had left, and the tow truck had hauled away the still smoky-smelling carcass of the Jeep, someone dropped me off at home. Building maintenance was kind enough to waive the $20 lockout fee, probably because I looked just as terrible as I felt. I got inside, and after sobbing uncontrollably for a few minutes, I called my mom. Now, Mom had always been there when I was a child. She was home with us kids growing up, and she was always the nurturer. She was always there to prepare nutritious meals for us, to sew our Halloween costumes, to make sure that we had cupcakes to take to class on our birthday. Of course, she would be the first one that I would call. But it wasn't always like that. See, I reached that awkward teenage phase where my mom suddenly turned into a monster. Like a minotaur, we were trapped together in the maze of my angst and my hormones. My only options were to fight or flee, and I did plenty of both in those days. But then one day, Mom wasn't home. She wasn't there all the time. You see, my mom had dared to pursue a life of her own, no longer just an appendage of the rest of the family. She had her own life, and she went back to school. She wasn't there to help the other mothers sew our drill team uniforms. She wasn't there to staff the bake sale. She was studying. She was in class. She was preparing a new life for herself. I was angry at her. One time, I was so mad, I was running late and I missed the bus. And my mother, rather than go just a few minutes out of her way, made me call the driver's ed class and have some pimply nerd make me nauseous on my way to school. The nerve. And then the worst moment of all was when my mother dared to graduate with a fancy law degree only 5 weeks before I earned my high school diploma, sucking all the glory out of a moment that should have been mine. So She went off to pursue a new career as an attorney working with the Department of Justice, and I went off to college. I wasn't very supportive of my mother in those days. I was at best a disinterested listener to her opening and closing arguments. I begrudgingly helped assist her carry huge crates of thousands of documents worth of evidence to the rental van that she needed to haul all of these things to court. And I tuned out most of the conversation about defendants and judges, juries, and verdicts. I didn't care because I was destined for something better, something more glamorous, something I could really be proud of. But things didn't turn out like that. Things were a lot harder than I imagined they'd be. I changed my major multiple times in college, and when I finally graduated, I still had no clue what I was going to do with the rest of my life. I dabbled at one low-level job and then another, until finally landing here, 2 months into a job I absolutely hated, even worse than the job I'd left 2 months earlier. So I called my mom. It was my dad that answered. "Kid," he said, "she's at trial. I'm afraid you're on your own with this one." I was crushed and exhausted. I was way too overwhelmed with everything that had happened, and I lay down and I took a little nap for probably about an hour. What awakened me was the phone ringing again. It was my dad, and he was telling me, "Well, I spoke with your mom, and she says that she loves you, and she doesn't want you to be afraid, but a nice man is going to come to your house and talk to you. You should open the door and let him in. I'm going to be on my way in just a few minutes, and I'll help out." Well, this was an unusual development, something interesting in an otherwise terrible day. When I heard the knock at the door, I opened it. There on the other side of the door was not a nice man. There on the other side of the door was a federal marshal, and he walked in and he was all business. He walked through the house checking the windows, the doors, scrutinizing the locks, the security, and the vulnerabilities. He had some papers that he wanted me to sign so that he could have the Jeep taken to the FBI examination lab. Unbelievingly, I asked him, "What is all of this about?" And he looked at me. I couldn't tell if he thought I was a moron or just a little bit naive. And he said, "Do you know who your mother is? Do you know what your mother does?" Well, of course, I knew my mom was a federal prosecutor with the Department of Justice in the area of criminal tax fraud. That's boring stuff, right? Except I'd forgotten some of the not-so-boring stories. Some of you may remember Al Capone and some of his cronies. Tax fraud is one of the ways that the Department of Justice is able to take down some of our nation's worst criminals. And right now, at this very moment, sitting in a jail cell 1,000 miles away, was an evil man that had the power to reach across state lines and blow up your car. And that evil man, he was afraid of my mom, of the woman who had packed nutritious lunches into my Sean Cassidy lunchbox and sent me out with a wool hat on chilly mornings. He was afraid of her. That moment, I realized something different about my mom. And I won't say our relationship changed overnight, but in time, things would come to change. The next week, I did get fired. Luckily for me, I had already accepted another offer from a company that had made an offer to me 2 months earlier, but I denied at the time. The offer they came up with this time was significantly better, and it would launch a new career for me that I would enjoy for the next 16 years of my life. I was pretty traumatized by the explosion of the Jeep, and it took me another 3 months to even consider a new vehicle. At the time I decided what I wanted, they didn't have one on the lot. And so it was June 30th that the dealer called me and said, "Catherine, it's here, and it's beautiful. Give me your address, I'm gonna drive it out to your office." When it came, it was a brand new, shiny BMW convertible that I would enjoy for the next 234,000 miles in my life. As for Mom, She and I have grown into friends today. She is one of my best friends, and I look forward to every moment that I get to spend with her. It's not just because she's such a generous woman, it's also because she is such a fantastic role model for me, because she had the ability to reinvent herself well after raising her family, to be both a mother and an attorney, a student and a mentor. That day many years ago, I wanted my mommy, but today I want to be like my mom.